Kaguya-sama Love is War is the greatest romance anime of all time. Is that an exaggeration to say? Probably. Do I have any right to decide that? Probably not. Yet there's something so alluring about this show that sets it apart from other romances to me. In a genre that's almost as populated as isekai, it becomes more and more difficult for any particular show to stand out. Every one of them tries to have their own distinguishing gimmick, and while something like that can be seen in Kaguya-sama, these gimmicks can only entertain for so long. But one thing that hails excellence from mediocrity for me is a cast of strong written characters that have layers to unpack and understand, dissect and relate to. Something that I can latch onto, adding more to the story while enhancing what it already does best. And of all of the romance anime I've seen, Kaguya-sama does this better than any other, and I believe this because of the near perfect dynamic between the two main characters. It's a dynamic that goes far beyond the bounds of an average romance. It's one that delves deep into the concepts such as personality, masks we use to hide our true selves, and how we evolve as people through others. It's one that brought out an already interesting style to a level that I've seen rarely executed well in anime, and one that made me read close to 100 chapters in a single night, and no, I do not regret it. So if you've enjoyed the anime up to this point and want to learn more, or have read the manga and want a concise analysis of what the f you've read, join me as I go scene by scene and take an extensive look down the barrel that is the duality of Kaguya Shinomiya and Miyuki Shirogane. Professionalism, stature, excellence, perfectionism. These are all words that define the Shinomiya family, a credo to live by, burned into the minds of their children at birth. Naturally, this is the way that Kaguya was raised, an expectation she was made to uphold. It was the only way of life she knew, a way of life she believed everyone lived, a belief born from the seclusion of her rich and powerful family, that upon being cast into reality would slowly crumble, leaving a husk of a former person. Kaguya poured every bit of this belief into every interaction she had with the world. If others would struggle or show weakness, she wouldn't hesitate to point it out, quite brutally at times, but that was because that was the way she was treated. Doing this time after time, Kaguya would come to realize that the world she was raised in was quite different from the ones others had lived in. The constant strive for perfection that would encompass how her family treated her was mostly exclusive to her family. Bringing this attitude into the lives of others at school, even the ones she called friends, would soon become a deterrent. As she saw more and more people get hurt by her words, subsequently the people around her grew more and more distant, not wanting to feel the pain of the harsh reality Kaguya experienced in her daily life. It's through this cold attitude and distant demeanor that Kaguya would garner the nickname Ice Princess, a perfect title for the cold-hearted yet straight-shooting prodigy of the Shinomiya clan, though this was far from the reality Kaguya strove for or wanted. Despite her outward appearances, Kaguya was kind at heart, though how she would express this was less than ideal at times. The cold, calculated demeanor she would display was simply her reflecting the same methods of teaching that her family would use on her. It was never a case of wanting to be distant, it was a distant way of wanting to help. Though, through seeing the reactions of those she would try to impart this wisdom on, it made her realize that these people grew to hate her, making her grow more distant from them. The way she spoke to them was the only way she knew to speak, but if it caused them pain, it would be better that they never grew close to begin with. For this, she hated herself, and the personality she'd been crafted with since birth. This growing reality would pressure Kaguya to avoid others, only using them when it was beneficial to her. It was a lonely, painful life, but if it was a life sparing others from pain, then that void of silence would become peace. This was the philosophy that she lived by for quite some time, but would one day change when she met someone who shared that same credo as her. A boy named Miyuki Shirogane was the son of a family with hopes and aspirations. Coming from a family far less wealthy than his peers, having a new generation of children to break through those societal shackles would be exactly what his parents wanted, though these astronomically high expectations would lead to a slew of problems throughout his life. It began in kindergarten. The first set of expectations were set by his mother, simply to pass an entrance exam, a task he ultimately failed. A similar situation would happen in grade school, and upon failing those entrance exams, would leave a negative precedent for the remainder of Miyuki's life. Eventually, for reasons unrelated to Miyuki, his mother would end up leaving the family, while taking their daughter with her. All he could believe was that his mother had lost interest in raising him and wanted a new life. Abandoned, lost, and filled with self-consciousness, this should have been the boiling point of Miyuki's frustrations, yet it conjured a far different reaction. If he were to work hard, harder than anyone else, maybe, just maybe, he could fix all the problems of his life. His financial situation, his social status, it may even bring back his mother. So he marched down this path with a strong determination, a straight shot towards his goals, though he didn't do so with a gusto. As he struggled down this path, he would grow more spiteful to those who had it easier than him, those he believed looked down on him. While his work made him far more academically inclined, Miyuki still struggled with many other aspects of his life. Every time he would struggle with something, it would push him further and further down the rabbit hole of self-loathing. And this attitude would be at its strongest upon entering Shuchin Academy, one of Japan's most prestigious high schools. Attending a school of this stature would naturally come with some consequences. Being a school filled with families of a higher social class, many would disapprove of those who enter with a lower income bracket. They would be teased, ignored, treated like outsiders. Miyuki despised those who glared at him for that reason. He worked so hard to get into this school, yet these people would have the nerve to discredit that for reasons beyond his control. While his first few days would ultimately be disappointing, eventually he was gifted with an opportunity from the school's current council president. An opportunity to join the student council, to make a name for himself, to earn the respect of his peers. While he was initially skeptical to join, he would change his mind at the sight of a selflessly heroic act. An act done by someone he believed would embody the frivolous nature of Shuchin Academy. Someone who was the first bright light in a dark tunnel of life he had been traveling through. Yet this person was as cold as ice to him. She didn't give him any attention. Confused and desperate, he turned to his fellow student council members for advice, and the response he received was one that completely altered the course of Miyuki's future. It's all over if people look down on you. You need to act like you expect everyone to fall in love with you. Then no one will look down on you. In other words, put up a front, a confident front, one to capture everyone's attention. Exactly. It only made sense. Act just like she does. Heroic and kind, confident and prideful, intelligent and competitive. If he could act just like her, he was bound to grab her attention. And so, that fateful day, Miyuki walked straight up to this person and made a request her pride couldn't ignore. From that day forward, she knew his name. While most peers in Kaguya's life folded to some form of conformity, one Miyuki Shirogane would not. He was smart, handsome, popular, and a harder worker than anyone else in her school. To Kaguya, this man was the beating heart of Shuchin Academy, the student council president, the first person she had fallen in love with. His kindness towards others, the bags under his eyes signifying his hard work, his confidence in the face of adversity. These would be the traits she would grow to admire, and she would admire him so much that it would slowly mark a change within herself. Surely someone as kind-hearted as the president wouldn't fall in love with someone so cold to the touch. If she wanted him to fall for her, the Ice Princess Kaguya would have to disappear, and in its wake, a new, kinder Kaguya would be born, one wearing a mask over her true self. If the old Kaguya would disappear, maybe she could make friends again. Maybe she could feel happiness. And maybe she could tell Shirogane how she really feels. Yet, her pride wouldn't simply let her confess these feelings to him. Besides, there was so many hurdles in her personal life to get in the way of that. But if she could make him confess to her, well then that would be a completely different story. Surely someone like Kaguya would never say yes to a confession from someone like me, Miyuki would think. Being of a different social class, knowing how much I struggle if I don't always give things my all, the real me was someone Kaguya would never simply say yes to. But if I put on a mask of someone strong and confident, then maybe I could make her fall in love with me. And so, the war began. For month after month, the two members of the student council would play mind games with one another, both under the guise of their fake self, trying to make the other confess. Both so filled with pride, the lengths they would go to make the other slip up was comical, yet there was a tinge of sincerity to it. though both would soon come to realize that this daily battle was interfering with reality, all coming to a dramatic halt when Miyuki received an acceptance letter from Stanford. If the two students truly wanted to be with one another, they would need to let go of some of their pride and face that reality. So, on the night of Shujin Academy's Culture Festival, Miyuki would orchestrate a confession to Kaguya that only the over-the-top confident Miyuki could pull off. It would need to be something so grandiose that even someone like Kaguya would become swept up in the moment. While he was planning that, Kaguya was slowly making her way up to confess as well. Granted on a far smaller scale, as she didn't see the same need to raise the bar to the level Shirogane did. But all's well that ends well, and in the end, Shirogane's plan worked flawlessly. He got to confess his feelings to her, asked her to go to Stanford with him, and she responded with something far better than Miyuki had hoped. It was a perfect ending to their fun and games, but something still felt off. After all, the two people who had just shared such a beautiful moment were still wearing masks. And if you know anything from COVID, it's that it's really hard to kiss with a mask on. And the days following the Culture Festival would prove that their situation was not as smooth as they both would have hoped. Now having been the closest the two have ever been with one another, Miyuki desperately wanted an answer from Kaguya on what they were going forward, but what he was met with was a cold shoulder, someone different than the Kaguya he'd seen for the last year. He was completely berated with half-baked insults and criticisms. When approaching the target question, he was met with a response his prideful, irrational self would think of. It was as if the worst-case scenarios he'd come to imagine were now reality. No matter how Miyuki tried to smooth things over, Kaguya's reactions would become worse and worse. It was an uphill battle to no avail on the side of Miyuki, but he was stubborn. Striving to keep up his facade at all costs meant having sleepless nights trying to understand her plan and his next moves. But people can only last with stress for so long. And eventually... After the kiss, Kaguya had become happier than she ever was. So happy, in fact, that the fabled Ice Princess had begun to fade away. Though, for better or worse, this part of herself was still an integral part of her being, one that allowed Kaguya to tread the line of mature and naive. With the reality that Shirogane wanted her to cross the seas to Stanford, the fear she felt from her family learning about him, and the embarrassment from the less than typical first kiss, she went into a survival state, reawakening that Ice Princess persona she'd worked so hard to keep under wraps. Kaguya wanted to think clearer, stop being caught up in the moment, but more importantly, to make sure Miyuki actually wanted to be with the real her, and didn't just fall in love with the mask she'd been wearing for so long. So, she began to treat him harshly, just like the old Kaguya treated others. She fought for herself rather than for what others wanted. She bred the expectations of herself in Miyuki. She no longer acted like the flustered, confused Kaguya we'd known throughout the story. She was brutal and real, so real that Miyuki didn't have the mental energy to adjust. And in the end, as Miyuki collapsed to the floor, Kaguya began to remember exactly why she hid this part of herself, and just how much pain she can cause others. I need to try harder. My real self is pathetic. These were the last words running through Miyuki's mind before he collapsed. Upon awaking at the hospital, Miyuki would come to a breaking point with his stresses. He vented to the doctors, confessing all the troubles that led him to this point. The stress about his mother as a child, the stress about failure, the stress about his relationship with Kaguya. All of it would come to a boiling point. He had felt worthless his whole life, covering it up with a band-aid that was overdue to fall off. The real self of Shirogane was someone weak and vulnerable, a far cry from the real version of Kaguya. If he didn't keep up his facade, she would surely lose interest in him. They were never destined to be. The Kaguya that Miyuki saw wasn't something he hadn't seen before. He knew that Kaguya was like this. It's the whole reason he put on his facade to begin with. The Ice Princess was the person he fell in love with. The kindness was something that creeped up as they became closer. Kaguya revealing her true self was nothing new, though Miyuki revealing himself to her was, or so he thought. Regardless, he refused to take off his mask, doubled down and would make up for everything he had messed up. Nothing would stop him from changing who he'd been these last couple years. Kaguya heard all of this, however. Miyuki was a hard worker, a harder worker than anyone else, but he wasn't gifted with the latent abilities to do anything he wanted. Kaguya knew this, just as Miyuki knew Kaguya wasn't as kind and cute as she acted around him. Both already knew they wore masks. While Miyuki made the first move to confess his feelings, Kaguya wanted to be the first to break through their lies and love Miyuki for who he truly was, flaws and all. All of this would conclude on Christmas Eve. On the night of Christmas Eve, Kaguya and Miyuki began to exchange gifts, though Miyuki was hesitant to give his to Kaguya. He had bought it without really thinking it was worthy of her. It wasn't the perfect gift that Shinomiya would have wanted. After all, someone as perfect as her would never want something so mediocre, he thought. Yet Kaguya did want it. It was something to show the side of Miyuki that he was desperately hiding. The truth is, you hate me. That's why you won't give it to me. Why don't you just come out and say it? That you hate me because I'm willful and have a terrible personality. I revealed my true self to you, because if you really like someone, you want that other person to see your true self, to share everything and understand each other completely. Miyuki understood and explained how he already liked Kaguya for who she was, even with her other personality, but he struggled to understand how that feeling could be reciprocated. Yet when Kaguya opened up his gift and saw a cup and ball game, such a silly gift that made no sense for Christmas, she smiled. Things weren't perfect. The mood wasn't right. Nothing had gone according to plan. There weren't even any Christmas lights around. Yet she looked so happy. I don't need Christmas lights or balloons. The balloons were wonderful and romantic, but things don't always have to be like that. I think something ordinary like this is romantic too. So, Shirogane, it's Christmas. We're a couple. What do couples usually do now? If you want something ordinary, I guess we do something like this. Two people who by all logic were never destined to be together. From different lifestyles, having different personalities, in all respects they were complete opposites. Yet through meeting each other were able to become their stronger selves, and though it took time for each to realize, loved each other despite their flaws. Everyone puts on a mask like this to hold some sort of normalcy with the people we talk to. Not everything is going to be revealed to everyone you know, but the people who you can show your true selves to will always be the people who you love and trust the most. Watching these two work through their struggles and improve through each other shows just how similar yet different they are to each other. More importantly, it shows how beautiful and thought out their dynamic is. A flawless dynamic between two characters who make up one of the best romance stories I've ever witnessed.